10 minutes before 8, just quickly reminding you, Paul Novak, the General Secretary of the TUC, will be here to take your calls after 9. 10 to 8 now. Let's look, I suppose, to put it rather crudely, the other side of the conversation or the negotiations, which is the Government Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, joins me now. Thank you for coming on. I understand that later this morning, teachers and other education workers are going to march to Westminster. Will you be meeting them? Good morning.
No, I won't be meeting. Good morning, Nick. I won't be meeting them on the march, but I did meet them on Monday, which is the third time I've met them since January, and and I've said I will continue to meet them. So we will be setting up another round of discussions as well.
What do you understand this dispute to be about? Is it about teachers' pay? Is it about morale? Is it about retention of staff? Is it about the government's budget and spending towards education?
Well, it's moved, to be honest. When I first came into the job, I had a letter from all the unions demanding more money for schools, and that was to cover the pay rises, the 5% and the 8.9%, which were recommended by the independent pay review body, were higher than schools were expecting and had budgeted for. So they'd budgeted for 3%. So that was the 25th of October when I started the job. So they were saying they needed an extra £2 billion for next year and the year after to fund that, and also the inflationary pressures on our schools and school budgets. So that was the first challenge, and that was the autumn statement. And we did achieve that. So they got an extra £2 billion as requested. Then we've had a discussion about inflation and inflation rises. We said, look, we cannot bake in inflation. It would affect everybody. These inflation busting pay rises are unreasonable and they're unrealistic. What we have to do is get rid of inflation. We know why it's there, the war in Ukraine, etc., and the overhang of the pandemic. But we need to focus on that, not bake it in through, giving inflation busting pay rises. Then they said about retention. Now, we have a retention and recruitment strategy. It was put in place in 2019. It was implemented in 2021. Clearly, it's been implemented through the pandemic, but we've said, look, we've got a strategy. We need to make sure this is working. So we're willing to have discussions around that, and also around, future pay, workload, conditions, behaviour, all the other things that teachers say. So we've been, I think, constructive, but it has kind of moved along. But I think, there's a lot of people on strike today, and we very much regret that. It's very disappointing. Yes, in the case of education, the discussions have moved along.
In the past, you told me that you didn't want teachers to strike. These strikes have been announced, of course, on your watch. Do you accept some level of failure, Secretary of State?
Well, I don't want these to go ahead.
No, indeed.
And
so do you accept the level of failure?
I'll do anything possible, but only things that make sense as well. Clearly, inflation busting pay rises make no sense. But I will do anything possible to make sure that we have.
Have you failed to some point?
I thought I was doing quite well getting £2 billion actually at the time out of the Chancellor, which was, we were the only department actually, as Plus Health, and we know there were some economic difficulties then. But, I'll always accept, my responsibility, which is to make sure our children get a world-class education. And to do that, we need to make sure that we recruit the best and we retain the best teachers. And I am very focused on trying to do that. But I don't know what else we could have done apart from give inflation busting pay rises, which are not the right answer to everybody, every one of your listeners.
The NEU, the National Education Union, has said that there could be disruption in about 85% of classes in state schools. Do you have any figures to hand, Secretary of State, as to what you understand, or is it too early in the morning for that?
It is too early. We'll know this afternoon, and we'll publish something this afternoon. We did do a survey which showed, which head teachers, quite a lot of head teachers actually responded to, which showed that the majority of schools would be open, but of course some of those may have some restrictions.
To teachers who have not informed their heads as to whether or not they would be in school today, therefore making it very difficult for planning as to how you might do, whether, if I have 30 children under my charge, we don't know whether Mr. Ferrari is coming in or not. What would you say to those teachers?
Well, I did say to them, I wrote to them all saying, look, we really do need to, we need to minimise the disruption to children's education. They have suffered too much already through the pandemic, and we need to be focused on our children. So I said, obviously people have a right to strike, but I wrote to them and said, if you are going to strike, please inform your head, because it's important that the head teachers are doing an amazing job, and our school leaders, of trying to minimise the disruption as much as possible. But, they need to help them in that by being fair and letting them know if they're going to be striking or not.
But what would you say to those who haven't done that, Secretary of State?
Well, it's unreasonable.
They tell us that the needs of the child comes first, but it would appear they can decide not to say whether or not they're going to be there to look after 30 plus of them.
Well, it seems unreasonable to me.
What are the chances of averting? You'll be aware there are strikes planned for next month, 15th and 16th of March. What are the chances of averting those?
Well, I don't know, but when we left the meeting on Monday, which was a constructive meeting, they basically said to me, look, there's no chance of stopping these strikes on Wednesday, but there are 28 days between the first strikes and the next strike day. So we will continue discussions. And as long as we can have reasonable discussions, then, I'm very constructive. I've worked in business for many years. I've had lots of different difficult situations that I've had to deal with workforces, and I've also always been focused on attracting the best and retaining people. So, I'm constructive about what we need to do to make sure that that's the case. Our children deserve a world-class education, and I'm here to make sure they get one.
A couple of other matters while I have the benefit on the line. The Daily Telegraph's associate editor, Chris Hope, or Chopper, reported yesterday that nobody actually wants the now vacant job as chairman of the Conservative Party with Mr Zahawi's departure. Indeed, one of your Conservative colleagues, Lee Anderson, says the Tory party is, quotes, a bit like the band on the Titanic. What instrument are you playing?
Well, I'm definitely not like a band on the Titanic. The only instrument I could play is probably recorder. I did do piano for a bit, but it didn't go down well.
Do you recognise that simile, that it is like the band on the Titanic? It does seem
Definitely
you're certainly
not.
sinking in the polls, and when you look around, you seem to be losing senior members at a rapid rate of knots.
Well, definitely not. You have to remember that we've had extreme economic challenges, for the last couple of years. But the Conservative Party is still the oldest and most successful political party in the world. And
doesn't feel
I'm
like it
very
at the
proud of
moment,
that.
does it, really?
No, I think when you've got challenges, it never feels like that. And, clearly we've got a day with industrial action today. So, this is not something that's easy to manage. But I still have faith, very much so, in the Conservative Party to get it right.
Just finally, you mentioned that you came into post on the 25th of October, as indeed did Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. This is a bit of a media invention, but we've worked out it's 100 days then since the PM took his post. What's been his or the government's biggest achievement in those 100 days, in your views, Gillian Keegan?
I would say stabilising the economy and also continuing the support in Ukraine and upping the support in Ukraine. We've committed £2.3 billion to support Ukraine with weapons, more and more weapons, to help them in their defeat Russia. And I think that's probably the two biggest ones in the first 100 days. But in schools, I would say the extra £2 billion, that's happened in the first 100 days. And also school rebuilding programme, we've announced that as well.
Parents unable to get their children to school today in some instances, the worst teachers' strike for many years. And on the subject of industrial action, we now have potentially firefighters' strike, the first time in 20 years, all achieved in 100 days by your boss, the Prime Minister. Astonishingly.
All fuelled by inflation and all fuelled by workers asking for inflation-busting pay rises, which we don't believe is the right answer for our economy. We have to halve inflation. We have to make sure the pound in everybody's pocket is worth more by the end of the year. That's what we'll be focused on, and that will be a great achievement if we can do that.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you, Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, appearing here on LBC, where the time is 8 o'clock. Let's pick up on the latest news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock.